Hello, I'm Kerry Bloedorn, a local historian and Hodag enthusiast. In this video series, we'll be talking about the Great Pine Beast, or as most people know it as, the Rhinelander Hodag. We'll talk about its origins, its discovery, the hoax, and the culture that has built up around this legendary creature within the Rhinelander community for over 100 years, to become a well-known part of Wisconsin heritage. So let's take a walk deep into the pine groves, along the banks of the mighty Wisconsin River, past the unique wetlands of the area, and into the historical record as we learn about the famous Hodag. Come on.
The origins of the Hodag are shrouded in mist similar to those that come off the Wisconsin River on a hot day from the turning of a cool night. There are many stories about how the Hodag lore came to be that stretch from Maine to Montana, and even into the watery depths of the ancient world. Anywhere forests were being cut as America expanded from east to west, there were lumber camps, and in those camps loggers. And from those woodsmen's mouths came the tallest tales in the annals of American history. Stories of Paul Bunyan, the greatest lumberjack to ever live, stories of his great size and feats of strength, stories of strange creatures that inhabited the vast, dark, primeval forests of the North American continent seem to have no end and no bounds.
One particular story that developed in the lumber camps across the Pine Belt involved what became of a lumber oxen that passed on. Sitting on the deacon seat in a log bunkhouse deep in the forest, men would tell of these mighty beasts of burden having died from a hard life of labor, and then ceremonially placed on a funeral pyre to be burned to ash. From this fire arose the spirit of the dead oxen, and into the forest its spirit became a Hodag.
Descriptions of this spirit varied from place to place, but they all had similar features of the ox it came from. A stout and sturdy frame, oxen-like horns, spikes along its back, ending with a sharp pointed tail. Fur-bearing and yet lizard-like, with tusks for teeth and razor-sharp claws fore and aft. Its physical manifestation was beastly and ancient, such as a Jurassic creature might be.
Some stories say the Hodag was named after a tool called a grub hoe, or a hodag. Its exact origins lost in transit as tales moved from camp to camp on the lips of those that told them in the dim, smoky light of the logging camp bunkhouse.
But long before these United States took shape on the continent, the native peoples of this land passed down their verbal history, which included spirits for all things on earth above and below. From the high peaks and cloud-strewn skies to the deepest waters of the Great Lakes. One of those spirits is known as Mishapishu, identified today as a water panther spirit. These most revered and feared creatures were the controlling force of the waterways and deep lakes of what is now the Midwest and the southern Canadian regions. In southern Wisconsin and elsewhere, these water panthers were reflected in earthen mounds built by the peoples that walked this land thousands of years ago. In the Great Lakes area, they were said to be protectors of the vast copper reserves of the Keweenaw Peninsula, on Isle Royal, and elsewhere along Lake Superior, including their purported home island of Michipicoten. These early inhabitants of the continent, including the Anishinaabe people, gave respect and laid tobacco down to honor Mishapishu before crossing its watery domain in the hopes of safe passage. Along Lake Superior, just north of Sault Ste. Marie, can be found the Agawa rock pictographs, a several hundred-year-old Native American rock artwork depicting Mishapishu. You'll see it has a striking resemblance to the creature that became known as the Hodag. It is highly likely that stories of Mishapishu were picked up by early Europeans that came to North America, and as is often done throughout history via verbal tales, molded into the folklore that ended up in those early American logging camps.
Today in Rhinelander, home of the Hodag, we pay homage to these origins by sharing the stories of how the great pine beast came to be. But part of the continuing intrigue of the legends and lore is the mystery they are shrouded in, with roots going back potentially thousands of years into the ancient past.
Back in the 1880s, northern Wisconsin was still in a rather natural state, with pine forests stretching across the northern highland region. As civilization expanded and the axe rang through the woods from south and north, eventually they made their way along the banks of the mighty Wisconsin River to a place then known as Pelican Rapids, later to be named Rhinelander.
This place was surrounded by a grove of virgin pine trees said to be 9 miles by 40 miles wide, with an average sized tree of 55 inches in diameter, some specimens wider than 6 feet across and 100 feet tall. In the early days of Wisconsin history, people weren't entirely sure what types of animals could be lurking among the tall pines of the Northwoods. As small logging communities sprang up and grew, it may have been easy to make believe what creatures could be hiding deep in the swamps and along the riverbanks of the area.
Enter the renowned timber cruiser, surveyor, mapmaker, and woodsman Gene Shepard. Born at Fort Howard, now known as Green Bay, in 1854, he grew up in the New London, Wisconsin area until his youthful muscles brought him to the fledgling boomtown of Rhinelander. He had cruised the area some years before it became a city and was now on hand to watch the town spring up from the dirt, practically overnight.
With the railroad came people, and with people, a city. There is much to be said about the life and times of Gene Shepard, which was aptly described in Kurt Kortenhoff's premier book on the topic, Long Live the Hodag. Gene was a regular Gene of all trades, and aside from being a notable character and well thought of woodsman, he was also quite the prankster.
As the trees were quickly being cut down and turned to lumber and sawdust at the buzz of the saw blades in Rhinelander, Gene came up with a brilliant plan to put Rhinelander on the map. Having spent much time traversing the forests, in logging camps, and sitting around the campfire with Anishinaabe guides, whose language he was fluent, he had undoubtedly heard the stories of the ghastly dead ox and the water panther spirit Mishipishu, and so, like many yarn spinners of the time, adapted them to fit a most compelling narrative. The legends of the Hodag that Gene told were never quite the same telling to telling. Descriptors changed all the time, but he did stick to a few details. In 1893, he was walking through the woods near Lake Creek north of Rhinelander, in section 37 on the plat map, when a malevolent odor struck his nose and stopped him in his tracks. A magnificent creature jumped onto a log to confront him, the likeness of which he had never seen before. With the head of a frog and the face of an elephant, 2 oxen-like horns on its head, large tusk-like fangs in its mouth, covered in black hair, lizard-like in nature with a long tail lined with spikes down its back and a spear at the end of its tail. A beast approximately 7 feet long, 30 inches tall, and 200 pounds was the sight that stood before him, snarling and vicious, ready to rip him limb from limb. Gene was able to capture a photo of this pine beast with the primitive photography equipment he just happened to have on hand that day.
Gene had surmised that over the course of many years in the forest, that this elusive creature lived deep in the swamps of the high-timbered forest, spending its days soaking in the sun along the wetland pools and feeding on mud turtles, fish, and the occasional deer that ventured too close to its lair.
It wasn't till a few years later in 1896 when Gene was able to capture a live specimen. He promptly put the beast on display at Oneida County's first fair, scaring man, woman, and child for 10 cents a viewing. They all left the grounds believing in the Northwoods' fiercest creature, the Hodag. It came out later that the Hodag that Gene put on display was not more than an imaginatively carved log, covered in ox hides taken from a local tannery and fixed up to appear as a ferocious beast. Gene purportedly had help from a friend, Luke Lakeshore Kearney, who would go on to write a book about the Hodag among other lumberjack tales, and claimed to have had a hand in the hoax to his dying days. With wires attached to articulating appendages, the Hodag could move and give off the appearance of a living animal, and so many were convinced of its realism. Word traveled quickly by newspaper headline across the nation in those days, and the next thing Gene knew, people were coming from far and wide to catch a glimpse of his Hodag. Articles were published in American cities from sea to shining sea, and the news was seen in New York State, where a Mr. Phineas T. Barnum caught wind of the foul-smelling creature and made his way to Rhinelander to offer Mr. Shepard a large sum of money to take the beast back to display in one of his popular circus sideshows. So too, the prestigious Smithsonian Museum in Washington, D.C. dispatched a scientific team to take a survey of the newly discovered animal. Whether Mr. Barnum or the Smithsonian team actually made it to Rhinelander is up for debate, but to true believers of the lore it seems entirely plausible. And although there is little evidence to corroborate the stories, there is no evidence to refute it.
Over the years, Gene displayed his Hodag to Rhinelander visitors. Enticed on the short walk from the train station to his Pelham Street home, many spectators gladly paid the dime, and for the money spent, came away thinking it a real creature.
Other stories also sprang up, such as Gene retrieving several eggs from a Hodag den, out of which he was able to hatch 9 Hodag pups. He had intention to train them as his own circus act, but found them too mean and unruly for domestication. And so late at night, under the cover of darkness, he slipped them into a boat and across the Pelican River, where he released them back into the wilds from whence they came.
Another detail often referenced is told of the live capturing event, and involves a pet white bulldog that was brought along for protection from the beast. During the wrangling, the poor bulldog was gobbled up, whereby the Hodag acquired the taste for white bulldogs ever after. In captivity, Gene was said to have fed the Hodag white bulldogs its favorite meal, but only on Sundays, and so white bulldogs are closely associated with the Hodag legends.
Even after Gene purchased the stately residence known as the Pines on Prospect Street in Rhinelander, he continued telling the legend of his Hodag, and it influenced the rest of his life. The property that was the Pines now includes a park called Shepard Park, and the home there known to locals as the Hodag House. The adjacent building was built by Shepard, which he called the Den. It's been said that Gene's original Hodag was kept at a resort he previously owned on Ballard Lake, near Star Lake, Wisconsin, and it was unfortunately burned in a fire there in the early 1900s. A couple famous capture photos turned into postcards are some of the most recognizable Hodag images produced. One around 1900 was taken by famous Anago photographer A.J. Kingsbury, featuring prominent members of the Rhinelander community, including Gene Shepard himself, and a recapturing done in 1952 featuring prominent locals of that era. The elder photo is very popular and routinely makes its way around the internet. Gene Shepard passed away in 1923 and is buried at Forest Home Cemetery in Rhinelander. His gravesite is adorned with a Hodag figurine, and even though Gene is gone in body, his spirit lives on in the Rhinelander community today. Granted, these are just a few of the dozens, maybe hundreds, of tales told about the famous Hodag. Hodag might not have ended up being an actual flesh and blood creature, but make no mistake, Hodags are real. The community of Rhinelander has spent the last 100 plus years wrapping its identity around Gene Shepard's story. Undoubtedly, it has taken on a life of its own and is a multi-million-dollar economic draw to the area. Everywhere you turn in the city of Rhinelander, dubbed the home of the Hodag, you will see the creature's depiction. Businesses don't have to look far for a name, as you'll find
Hodag Express Lube, Hodag Gun and Loan, Hodag Sports Club, Hodag Honda, Hodag Lanes, and the Hodag store.
The Rhinelander Chamber of Commerce has the largest statue of a Hodag on display in the city at its visitor center on Kemp Street along the banks of the Wisconsin River. They put on the Hodag Home and Lifestyle Show, among other Hodag-themed events.
The Hodag is emblazoned on the high school sign and on many of the sports teams' jerseys. The Hodag swim team takes a caged Hodag to all their meets, and the girls team used the power of the Hodag to bring home a state championship in 2021. Hodag Sports can be followed at hodagsports.com, of course. The Rhinelander High School yearbook, The Hodag, was founded in 1918 and has been printed for over 100 years. The Hodag was adopted as the official high school mascot in materials going back to the 1930s.
The Hodag Country Music Festival, held near Rhinelander, has gone on since 1978 and boasts the longest-running country music festival in history. The 9-day festival draws between 30 and 50,000 people every year and has seen performances from many of the most popular country music legends and chart-topping artists over the years.
Rhinelander is a river city, built around the waters of Boom Lake, a flowage of the Wisconsin River once used as a log boomage for the many sawmills along its banks. On it performs the Hodag water ski team during the picturesque days of the Wisconsin summers. The park they perform in, Hodag Park, displays a Wisconsin historical marker describing the Hodag's history and its importance to the community.
Many Hodag businesses have come and gone over the decades, but none talked about more fondly than the Hodag Bar, which was located on Lincoln Street in Rhinelander and featured a giant Hodag cutout displayed prominently on its rooftop.
That last Hodag was saved and is on display in front of the Logging Museum at Pioneer Park Historical Complex in Rhinelander.
In his time, Gene Shepard had a large boat constructed which he christened the SS Hodag that he intended to float to the World's Fair in St. Louis. But it wasn't to be, and the poor ship rotted at the moors on Boom Lake. But not before the ship's bell was salvaged and stored in the barn at his home, the Pines. Years later, Rhinelander newspaperman Jack Corey and a sports writer friend of his from nearby Anago would ask to have the bell from Gene's widow, and they would create a famous rivalry football game, the Bell Game, played between the Rhinelander Hodags and the Anago Red Robins, which continues to this day. Many of Rhinelander's emergency service vehicles, including police cars and fire trucks, have Hodags on them. As well as many city installations, boat landings, and municipal vehicles also have Hodags appearing. These are just a few examples of how the Rhinelander community has kept the Hodag alive for over 128 years. Yes, the Hodag has certainly withstood the tests of time. Rhinelander citizens, both native and transplants, are called Hodags, and the saying is, once a Hodag, always a Hodag, no matter where one lives afterward. Not only has Rhinelander built a legacy on Mr. Shepard's famous creature, but the Hodag has been featured in literature and film. A musical was created in the 1960s titled Hodag, and was performed all over the country, even taking a trip to Europe. More recently, a story called The Hodag Increments by Michael Scooble was adapted as a radio drama and performed by the Rhinelander High School Drama Department. Rhinelander resident Jerry Scheidel has played the part of Gene Shepard on a number of occasions and perpetrated Gene's tent-style Hodag performance at more recent county fairs. Many people over the years have helped to carry on the tradition started by Mr. Shepard. The Hodag history and culture has been written about by local writers and historians such as T.V. Olson, Lee Mayer, Chris Gilbertson, and others. A 2012 episode of Scooby-Doo featured the Hodag as a menace on the show. Old Shep himself appears in the cartoon as a traveling showman with a cabinet of curiosities. In 2017, J.K. Rowling, creator of the Harry Potter series, saw fit to include the Hodag in a new book, Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, bringing the Hodag to a younger and even larger audience. In 2021, the Hodag was included as a question on the famous trivia show, Jeopardy! In recent years, the Hodag has been involved in parody and spoof content on the internet, including I Saw a Hodag, a parody of the Tiger King song I Saw a Tiger as seen on the Netflix documentary, as well as an annual Groundhog's Day video, where instead of a groundhog looking for its shadow, a Hodag does. As previously mentioned, Hodag depictions can be found scattered all over the Rhinelander community. The largest Hodag sculpture, located at the Chamber of Commerce building, greets visitors to town and is a popular spot for photos.
Rhinelander business advocacy group Downtown Rhinelander Inc. developed a fiberglass molded Hodag blank which local artists painted in a variety of ways and themes before they were auctioned off, many of which can be seen around the Hodag city using a map that can be picked up at the Rhinelander Chamber of Commerce, Pioneer Park Historical Complex, or the Hodag store.
There certainly is no shortage of Hodag depictions to be found, and hundreds of artists have created images of Hodags. Depictions of Hodags vary greatly artist to artist. The original was described as being black, and manifested in that color in the early days. But sometime over the decades, for reasons forgotten to time, it has been popularly depicted as green, and has become the most common colored Hodag seen. The most plausible explanation told is that when the Rhinelander High School adopted the Hodag as its mascot, the school colors were green and white, and so one thing had to change: the school colors, or the color of the Hodag. I'm sure you can tell what the decision was.
Pioneer Park Historical Complex in Rhinelander has a famous logging museum, and it is the official Hodag museum in the community. It has some of the oldest Hodags on display in town. A replica of Gene's original Hodag was carved in 1951 by Ed Stoltz and is on display with many others. Hodag souvenirs can be purchased at the museum's gift shop as well. The complex's staff entertains thousands of visitors every summer from all over the country and all over the world with a version of the Hodag legend.
The Rhinelander Historical Society Museum near Gene Shepard's early Rhinelander home on Pelham Street has original photographs of Gene and the Hodag preserved in their archive. In 2018, Rhinelander native Ben Brunell opened the Hodag store on Shepard Street, where visitors and locals love to shop for Hodag swag. The Hodag store stocks over 200 individual Hodag items, including everything from figurines to hats, even stocking their signature Hodag beer and Hodag vodka. Best Embroideries and Hodag Gift Shop in downtown Rhinelander also stocks a variety of Hodag-themed souvenirs and clothing, and produced a very popular pandemic mask with the Hodag face on it. Over the years, a number of artists and authors have started their own Hodag-based businesses. Rhinelander native Jill Kosmarski wrote the beloved Happy the Hodag children's book series and has a full line of fun items associated with her books, from plush stuffed toys to lip balms. Tom Barnett, whose art studio is located in downtown Rhinelander, also has a children's book series based on his Bob the Hodag character. Mr. Barnett has also offered up his artistic services to a number of outlets by designing a myriad of Hodag depictions for area businesses and organizations. The Hodag can be seen on logos, in murals, wood carvings, church stained glass, and more around Rhinelander. The largest ever depiction of the Hodag can be seen on the side of the new Hodag Dome Indoor Sports Complex at the Rhinelander High School, and is just over 75 feet long. The Hodag hasn't just stayed in Rhinelander and the North Woods, but has intrigued cryptid, folklore, and American mythology groups all across the nation. The Trek Bicycle Company has a fat tire bike called the Hodag. Hodag deer licks and other products can be found with a web search. Other communities and organizations across the country have adopted the Hodag for various purposes, and it's wonderful to see the Hodag making its way to fans across America. But no matter where Hodags pop up, all roads lead back to Rhinelander, Wisconsin, the home of the Hodag.
The Hodag lore and its roots go back potentially thousands of years. Even though we've covered a great deal of information in this series, the nature of the Hodag, how wide its reach has become, and the impact it's had on Wisconsin culture makes it near impossible to cover every aspect of the Hodag. But we think that's okay, because the Hodag is larger than this documentary, and we have left some mystery for you to explore and to discover for yourself. We believe the fascination with the Hodag will live on and attract visitors to the Rhinelander area for decades to come. In turn, they will fall in love with the thousands of clear glacial lakes, pristine wetlands, and beautiful forests of the North Woods of Wisconsin. Undoubtedly, others will come along to carry on the traditions, heritage, and preserve the Hodag legacy for the future to enjoy. Gene Shepard said it best when he said, "Thousands of people came to view the Hodag, and not one of them went away without having learned a little more about northern Wisconsin. And it's safe to guess that each one of those thousands told others what they had seen and heard. And in this way, the beauties, opportunities, and resources of northern Wisconsin spread, and many who came out of curiosity only have come to make their home with us, either permanently or for a few weeks or months out of the year. Long live the Hodag." That's a wrap. Hodag.